Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of the Master of None podcast. I am your host, as always, Stephen Murphy, joined by one of the regular rugby crew is Westy. We're one man down this week. We're missing Sam, so I've brought in a more than capable replacement, Owen Harrison, aka OverTheHillProp. Owen, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Stephen. Glad to be the podcast equivalent of a geographical lion and step into Sam's shoes here.
Yeah, you're a mercenary. You're a gun for hire at any stage.
And cheap.
Cheap, yeah. Your wage bill wasn't too demanding. No more than Westy's. Westy, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Good to get a break from Sam for a while.
I know. Yeah. What an asshole. Who likes that guy? Huh?
How dare he?
I know.
We made him.
He's not off on a different podcast. The reason Sam is missing is Sam and his girlfriend Corey gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Asha Iredale. Welcome to the world. So if you are listening along, tweet Sam, message him on Instagram, and say congrats to a future Irish international in Asha. She'll be out kicking balls and throwing balls at, I think next week, Westy, he was kind of aiming for, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think she wants to get the kicking in next week. We're going to hold off on the throwing for a week or two,
And then maybe a month we'll get the tackling in. Just, you never know. It's never too early to start. So Sam will be back, I'm sure, in the next week or two, depending on nappy changes and whatever else is sort of needed. But we have plenty of rugby to talk about. Some positives for one of our guests, Owen, who's a Munster fan. And then, I don't know, Westy, was Connacht playing at the weekend?
They only played like 15 minutes, didn't they? I think I turned it off after that point. Pretty good game, I think.
I mean, it's rare you beat Leinster 16-0, I'll tell you that. That is impressive.
It's got to be some sort of record.
But we'll get to that after. We'll start with the Munster game, Munster versus Ulster. Munster coming out 38 points to 10. Two pretty strong starting teams, Owen. Were we expecting that? Like, what, as a Munster fan, are you expecting Munster to take this very seriously, Rainbow Cup, especially now that they're 2 wins from 2? Is it kind of let's try and get some silverware?
I think so. I think it's a case of they're very much in the mix for it now. Depending on what way it goes, because even though they've announced the fixtures just this evening, in terms of the last few rounds of it, they still don't know what's going to happen with the final. There's some talk that it'll just be the top two Northern Hemisphere, but I think there was some talk in the background about trying to get the winner of the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere to have a playoff. And even potentially in Italy, I think they were looking at sometime in the middle of June. So we'll have to see where that's going. But if there's silverware on offer and you're in the run for it, I think you have to take it seriously and go for it. So
definitely, yeah, because I think a lot of teams, especially the big teams like Munster, were sort of maybe looking at it as a possible a blood and ground. But now when you're kind of 2 wins in from 2, having bet Leinster and now Ulster, it kind of be foolish not to go for it, wouldn't you?
I think so. I think the silly too. I said at the beginning, look, it's not much more than a development league, and I still stand by that. But I think it's about momentum and it's about building. And I think there's a couple of things in there that Munster can take the positives from. I think when I first looked at the teams from the game against Ulster on both sides, I said I thought it could be even enough. I thought, Ulster had come. They brought Henderson, they brought McCluskey. They had Lowry playing at 10, who a lot of people wanted to see there. They had a decent enough team out, and I thought that they could give Munster a challenge, and it would. I certainly didn't expect it to be as one-sided as it was.
Yeah, it was disappointing. We'll get on to Ulster in a sec, but me and Wesley also now think the Rainbow Cup is a development league. We didn't after week 1. We thought it was, I think, one of the best leagues in the world, but now we agree, development league for sure. Wesley, we mentioned already a strong team from Ulster, but Mike Lowry starting at 10. We've seen now, and it seems to have divided Ulster fans, that Mike Lowry at 10. I know some are for it, some are against it. Have you seen enough from him? Do you think it's still a possibility, or he's still so young?
I think it's probably still a possibility, right? He's pretty young. We've seen his impact as a playmaker, although be it a second playmaker, a fullback, quite a lot. It's obviously one pass that sticks out when you think of Lowry at 10 at the weekend. But no, I don't think you throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think he's a young player. He's got plenty of time to develop. At the end of the day, like, you're going up against, one of the top teams I don't want to say maybe in the world around, definitely in the league. It's either second or best team in the league, depending on how you look at it. Best team, at the minute. Well, them and Treviso, obviously, that powerhouse that we know.
Of course.
So I don't think. I don't think you throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think I was expecting kind of a bit more of a. I was expecting the response we got from Leinster out of Ulster after losing 2 weeks in a row. I thought they'd come back really kind of fighting for it. I think they showed some promise, but I just think they were kind of physically dominated by Munster, which was a strange one. And again, Lowry being that kind of diminutive 10, when you're physically outmatched like that, it probably doesn't reflect too well for you, which is probably why he's getting so much negative press. But still so much time for him to develop, I think.
Yeah, I think Larry definitely has the talent, but I think you're right. I think he potentially needs just a bit more time on the ball, and a bit more space. I think a lot of Ulster's problems happened both on the game line, but also with their halfback play, because I don't think they varied the game at all. Anytime Lowry got the ball, he was running it. I think he had 2-3 kicks in play when he was in a 10. So the Ulster defense were just literally, okay, we don't have to worry about kicks, we don't have to worry about turning back. It was just blitz defense the whole time. And as you said, look, that led to the Scannell's intercept try. But for me, it was actually whether that was Lowry himself or whether that was the tactics of, just run it and go with it as much as you can. I don't know. But all of the kicking came from Matheson at 9. There was very little from 10 and outside, and it just made Munster's life so much easier to be able to do that and read them. And once Addison started to mess around early doors and managed to get himself sent off, I mean, the match was over.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Red, because the first sprawl was the weirdest one. It was so like out of nowhere and unnecessary for Madison to just kind of spark something. And then the red card obviously was the biggest talking point from that first half. It was, a horrible hit, absolutely no attempt of a wrap. I've seen a lot of people on Twitter basically saying like Will Addison looked like he just didn't want to play, so he's like, I'm going to get sent off. That brings in the question, Westy, the new red card rules, and that's one of the negative kind of talking points about the new rules, is that a tackle like that, they get to bring someone back on, and it's it's a fair point, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I think, and I've kind of felt this way with it in the Super Rugby below, in the Southern Hemisphere. Like, I think it kind of it devalues what the red card is there for. Right? At the end of the day, a red card's not meant to be like, oh, naughty boys, now see how you play with 14 men. It's meant to be like, no, you've done something wrong and you have to correct your behavior. The only way to do that is to punish you to the highest level of the law. So I think the problem with having somebody off for 20 minutes and bringing someone back on, like the whole point is that the team suffers because you are not playing the game correctly in this case in a safe manner. So if you get to bring somebody on after that, I just think it is rather than what it's meant to be, which is something that's there to help correct player behavior during the game.
We lost you a bit there, Wesley, but I think you're back now. Owen, from Munster perspective, you have to be pretty happy. Like, the Munster look sharp, they look expansive. You have to be happy with how they played.
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think within the game overall, they've been playing a bit more, I suppose, freely over the last couple of weeks. And I always say to myself that, look, I see things as 3 ways. You have the optimist, the pessimist, and the realist. And I think within that, sort of the optimist for me is that, Van Graan has learned his lesson from the Pro 14 final, and they're changing their approach, and they're sort of broadening out from that with the game plan. The pessimists within me sort of says, well, that's only happening because, we're winning the collisions in the game lines against these teams at the moment, and it won't happen against the big teams. And I suppose the realist within me says it's probably a bit of both. And it'll take time as the young players come through. But I do have a gut feeling that there's just that slight shift in attitude from Munster, that they're willing to be a bit more, to play the ball a bit more, and take chances on the ball. And we've seen it with Larkham when he's had the sort of the non-internationals together, that he's got something out of that. And I think now we're starting to see it. I think for me, like during the game itself, I mean, Coombs was just outstanding. He was eating lads for breakfast out there. Like he was deliberately running at Stuart McCluskey and, taking him back 6 and 7 yards at every time he ran into him. And there was a couple of things there. His work in terms of, it's not just the power work, it's the ability to offload. It's how he's working on his handling and able to switch the ball, that he's able to fend players. And I think he's the sort of guy that, it has to be really, I'd say the summer now, he should be capped with the Ireland team, and he has to be a real sort of, he has to have a real opportunity, I think, for the autumn internationals and probably the Six Nations next year, as sort of replacing CJ as that big ball carrier at number 8 for Ireland, if they continue to play that way. Of the others, then, I thought Haley played really well. Obviously, Scannell was allowed. I think Ulster's, attitude and game plan, and I think Addison started it off very early, was try and take out Scannell. I mean, and literally to use both himself and McCluskey just running at him constantly. I think obviously Addison took it too far, but McCluskey tried it as well. But Munster then started they were winning the collisions, and they could afford to leave a back row standing in the 10-12 channel and just stop McCluskey. And that really tied up a lot of Ulster's play. And I think, you're then looking at sort of Munster being able to play, and they were able to use strike moves like they did with Haley's try and a couple of others, and just started to play ball, be much freer. And even though the scoreline was 38-10, it probably could have been a bit more. And I think it was fairly reflective of their dominance throughout the game.
Yeah, there's no point trying to take on Munster in a game of who can be more narky, because I think Munster are going to win that week in, week out. You've mentioned actually Mike Haley. He posted on Twitter today, they used him in a line out, I think early in the first half, and you kind of were highlighting that. What do you think they're trying to do when they're doing that? Is it just as a decoy, but then they're actually using him? Like, what are the benefits from doing that?
He's actually been used as a line-out option in the last 2 games in the Rainbow Cup. Against Leinster, he was he took the line-out at the front, jumped at 2, actually lifted by Dale Ende at the front, and the Chris Farrell came in to rip the ball and set up the maul against Leinster. And then there was a lovely line-out, and I think I'll actually give credit to the Loosehead on Twitter, Jeff, who put it up, where he did against Ulster. Haley starts at the front of the line out, drifts all the way to the back, and as the other forwards run to the front, he then starts his jump and waits for O'Mahony to come to him, and Cloete to come in from 9 and lift him up. Now, he got up, won the ball, but his actual pass back down didn't work. But it allowed him a free... the way it was meant to work, from what I can see, was it allowed them to win the ball at the back cleanly, unopposed, but it also allowed Coombs to run from the front of the line out, arc around towards the back. And if he takes that pop pass, it's almost the same as before the scrum for Scannell's try. He's coming round on an arc at pace. He's built up his momentum, and he's heading straight for the 10. And he's going to make serious yards off that. So if that pass is nailed, you've already got front foot ball, and you should be making serious yardage and potential sort of line breaks off that then.
Yeah, and that 10 was Mike Lowry also, not exactly the biggest stature of man. Yeah, look, it's interesting to see them trying out different things, and yeah, his pass did look like a back in a line out being used. It wasn't the best pass in the world, but Munster well deserving of the win, and they look sharp. Westy, from an Ulster fan kind of perspective, the loss to Connacht, you could use it as, look, they had an eye on Europe the following week. You could possibly, could you argue now this is a bit of a Europe hangover? Like, it's not been a good few weeks for Ulster.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, I think in some ways, and I mean this as a compliment, like Munster kind of picked up where Leicester left off. I think we're again seeing a bit of the kind of, we talked about Lowry kind of is in the decision making, lack of kicking. I mean, if Cooney is the 9, those decisions are probably made for him. There's more of a kicking threat coming from 9. Or more of an overall threat coming from 9 maybe than Munster, so Abby Mathewson. Maybe it's a bit of a hangover. Again, as I expected, a big kind of like grit in the teeth fight back. Like they hadn't lost to Munster all season. I thought they'd be really eager to hold on to that record. I think you're a little bit worried. I think, you'd want to see now. You'd want a big performance in their next game, but their next game is Ulster, or next game is Leinster, and if Leinster have anywhere near the momentum they had at the weekend, then they'd be in a lot of trouble, I think.
Yeah, it is a strange one. Like we've been saying on this podcast for a while that Munster and Ulster, in terms of the better team, it's been very close. But games like this, Owen, is where Ulster really, like games like that against Munster, is where they need to show that.
I think so, but I think it's very hard because of the way the season is structured and the way it goes. I mean, most of the InterPros are sort of, they're around Christmas or they're around the international period. So you're playing with second string teams going into these. It's very rare that you'll see an Ulster Munster game where they're fully loaded. And it tends to be worse around the Christmas period where the teams only sort of, I suppose, target one or two games, so you can have very much a second string against a first string side, and it comes like that. I think that was maybe one of the few times that I've seen relatively balanced teams going at it over the last number of years, and it was there. I don't think it's necessarily a true reflection of how of the dominance of Munster. I don't think overall. I don't think that would match out to the way that the teams are, because I think Dan McFarland has done a fantastic job. And I think the loss of the likes of Cooney, not having Madigan on the bench there and missing a couple of other players has really sort of impacted what they do. And I think particularly in the forwards, they need more than just Henderson to be able to carry a ball and really hit into guys. They need something more. Whether Nakarara, when he arrives next season, whether he can do that for them and give them that real boost, I'm not sure. But hopefully he can do something for them and they can continue to improve as they have done.
You know what he will bring, Owen? Offload City. So Belfast could be the new unofficial capital of Offload City. So let's keep our eyes on that. But yeah, you make a good point. Coetzee, that was the man. That's the lad that they're missing. That's who you're describing. It's Marcel Coetzee. We all know how highly they view David McCann. Nick Timoney's a fantastic player, but are they good enough to replace that much ball carrying beef, Westy?
Yeah, probably not. I mean, again, and I think Nakarara was almost a direct replacement for that. I don't know if he signed on in second row or back row for them.
Back row.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know he can play kind of both areas. I think they're probably missing a bit of Sean Reedy as well. He's that same kind of South African kind of chip on the shoulder, kind of muscle ball carrier. So I think the combination of things, the two big lads gone out, you really hope that Nakarara coming in is the answer to that. As you say, it can't always be Henderson. You had Timoney on the bench. I'm not sure why that decision was made, but they definitely were lacking in the physicality in the game, and there's pretty easy conclusions to draw where the physicality they have, like it wasn't there on Friday night.
Yeah, you don't want that physicality to go against Munster, but we'll leave that game now. We'll move on to Connacht versus Leinster. Leinster coming out on top, 50 points, 21. Too often on this podcast, we've talked about Connacht shipping 50 points. I think it's happened 3 times this season, Westy. Or 4, I think one of them was 48, so close enough, I think. Before we talk about the negative, though, we do want to talk about the departure of Quinn Roux from Connacht. It's been announced this week that he's played his last game. It's unfortunate with COVID and injuries that he didn't get to play his last game sort of in front of a crowd. Westy, a great player for Connacht, unlucky with injury towards the end of his tenure, but can you kind of describe what kind of a player he was for Connacht and what he meant?
Yeah, no, I think he's one of those. I think he had 7 years until, was it 9 years in Ireland, 7 years with Connacht. Came into Connacht at a time where we were starting to develop and starting to build. He was one of the first kind of that kind of crop to, with himself and Henshaw getting Ireland caps. It was kind of it marked the kind of changing of the tide within Connacht, where players were seriously considering Connacht for serious game time and serious progression. As you say, the last 2 years, I mean, I don't know, has he played 6 or 7 games in the last 2 years? He's had a pretty poor injury record, which is just a shame now, especially that he's gone, or he's going rather. His time is over. Yeah, look, he speaks very highly of Galway. He's a great ambassador for the club. He's a great talisman to have around. And you see how our defensive maul is manhandled or kind of non-existent at the weekend. And I'm not saying one player is going to solve it, but that, like, someone like Quinn is definitely part of the puzzle. A real leader, a big South African kind of almost a mercenary in sorts that they have in South African second rows.
Yeah.
So I think it's a big loss for the team and for the area as well.
Yeah, he mentioned in his statement that he plans on coming back with the wife and kids. He's a house here, which speaks obviously volumes of how he views the city on County of Galway. Owen, as an outlook, kind of looking in at Quinn Roux, obviously played for Ireland. He will be a massive loss, won't he?
I think so, and I think from as Westy said there, look, he was one of the first that sort of came around and was viewed in that primarily as a tight head lock role. And he was able to bring that from not only just the sort of the Connacht side, but he was also able to bring that up, and he was one of the few that could make the impact at sort of international level with that role. I mean, I remember him going down to, was it on the tour to South Africa in 2016, and just playing primarily as that to lock out the scrum, give you that sort of physicality and ballast. And hit players in rucks like they owe you money, and he there's lots of other guys in the Irish provinces that play that role, but very few of them have the size and physicality of Quinn Roux, and that could make that impact at international level. I think John Klein plays a very good role for Munster for that, but he hasn't been able to translate that to the international level. As you say, I think, and the other thing that the Westie said, Quinn Roux is so important to Connacht in terms of being able to get solidity at the scrum. It's not even winning ball in terms of being, taking ball at a lineup, but lifting players, being able there for the maul and defensive maul particularly around it, and hasn't done that. I think he's been unlucky. He's, as you said, with his injury profile and with COVID and everything else coming, the offer probably wasn't necessarily there for him from the IRFU, or maybe even within Connacht's budget, to be able to keep him. So, there's talk about him heading to France or wherever else. And I don't think anyone, either himself, or the Connacht fans would want to see him go, but I think it's probably just a byproduct of COVID and the financial status of the IRFU overall and rugby overall. And look, he's looking to come back, which says an awful lot about, I'm sure we'll get to it when we talk about the Lions, but there's a lot of negative stuff said about the players who come over here and qualify through residency and other things, that they're not seeing. He's obviously willing to come back and wants to come back and settle down in Galway afterwards. So, I mean, that says an awful lot about buying into this and becoming one of the players. He's not sort of Quinn Roux from South Africa. He's Quinn Roux. He's Connacht's Quinn Roux. And that's the way I would see him viewed, and as being very important. It's very unfortunate that he's going, and he'll be a huge loss, I think, to the Connacht team overall.
100%. During the press conference of the week, Andy Friend said, spoke very highly of him. We have found out since then, though, Westy, that Ireland, the IRFU have given kind of permission to Connacht to seek out a non-Irish qualified player to replace Quinn Roux, because obviously Connacht have 4 currently. Jared Butler, John Porch, Ben O'Donnell, and obviously Abraham Papali'i are your 4. If Andy Farrell could do us all a favour and cap Jared Butler during the summer and free up a slot, that would be great if you're listening, Andy. But it's great that, and he also said during the week that the incoming coach, De Wild, is very much involved with looking for that second row. So positive signs that we will be, getting possibly a South African, maybe, along that lines, kind of enforcer in that second row to replace Quinn.
Yeah, I think the key about getting the non-Irish qualified kind of player in, it's not necessarily about getting, not necessarily saying Irish players aren't good enough, but it means that this time around, although we're losing an established player, we won't be replacing him with an academy prospect from a different province. It means that hopefully we can go after somebody who is established, somebody who can not only bring physicality and and that kind of, that typical, let's say, South African, if it is a South African kind of role, we can also bring someone who has a wealth of experience of playing in other countries and playing somewhere else. As much as I'd love to see a young prospect come in who's going to do a long time with the club, I think we saw great kind of benefits, I think, maybe not to the man personally, but to the club overall when Dan Parks came in for a couple of years. So I think if you can get a player who has a stab, maybe not somebody of that age profile, but if you get somebody who has that kind of experience playing around the place. I think he will really help bring up the development of players like Niall Murray and Oisin Dowling who are there. Even someone like Gav Thornbury, who I think is having who had a fantastic season overall. I do think see him as more of the agile second row, which is good to have a kind of counterbalance now in a more physical and almost brutal second row like Quinn Roux has the capacity to be.
Yeah, rumor has it RG Simon's pretty sick of Limerick, so you never know. He might pop up to Galway for a while. But no, it's interesting to see how that unfolds. We'll have to unfortunately talk about the game. I didn't get to watch this live, and I picked a fantastic one to miss. But watching it back, there was a 9-minute highlight video on YouTube. Everything that came from Leinster, it started in the highlight package with a maul. Westy, we're sick in the teeth of talking on this podcast about that maul, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. And we know coaches are going out, new coaches are coming in. Can we be, positive when it comes to the outlook that this new forwards coach coming in, De Waald, rumor has it he's a bit of an angry man, possibly a bit violent, but this is what we need, right? We need that kind of mentality.
Yeah, we probably need it again. I'm not in favor of kind of, I don't mean in a sense of like, underhandedly getting the upper hand. I mean, we just kind of maybe we need someone who's a little bit more ruthless in the role. Again, as I say, he's got a lot of experience coaching teams. I don't know. He's coming from Grenoble. I don't know them well enough to know how their maul defense stacks up. But hopefully, it's a bit better. Certainly can't get much worse. Again, one of the problems that I've had, and we said on this podcast before, is that we seem to be constantly trying to defend them all, which is of course what you're supposed to do. But and maybe you have some fresh insights. We would think like, why aren't we standing off it and sacking the ball carrier at the back of the maul? Like, why aren't we at least changing up how we're defending it? Because I think it's one of those things. If you have, and first off, Leinster have mauled over 80% of their tries all season, so like this is established for them. If you're playing against a team that has a reputation for being bad at defending a driving maul, what are you going to do all day but driving maul? And of course, it's going to come off a couple of times, So if we change up the picture just a little bit, either try sack the jumper or try and stand off the maul, force them offside and run to the back, I just don't see why ideas like this haven't at least been brought in every so often. What have we got to lose with it,
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. I think there's three things that go into it. I think first of all is you have to look at why you're conceding territory and possession. First of all, to give them the opportunities to maul over like that.
Frankie Murphy was reffing.
No, I mean, he hasn't been reffing all season, right?
I don't know. We had a lot of it. Anyway, go on.
Owen, stop bringing logic and facts to this podcast. Okay, it's not welcome. It's not welcome at all.
Well, I think look at that, and that goes back to not just the maul. It goes back to what changed on sort of around the 15-minute mark that let Leinster back into this. It was mistakes and silly errors and silly penalties and things like that started this off. That you give them an opportunity around the middle of the field and you start conceding penalties, you've almost got to treat that like you're 22, that you can't start giving away cheap pens because they're just going to kick it down inside the 22, maul it, and then you're in big trouble again. I think then once you go past that, you look at the sort of the tactical side of it. And strangely, how the hell did Connacht manage to tactically do it against Munster down in Thomond for one game this season? Like, they competed for absolutely everything in the air, and that was a great tactic. It didn't hurt them. They literally just won everything. Gavin Thornbury was unreal. But like you said, Westy, I don't understand why when you're getting beaten like that, you stand off them. You just literally just sack it from the thing and just get into phased play straight away. And then I think then you've got to look at your technical side, I think is the last point, where I think fair enough, you're lacking resources around that to have the power to stop it. And like part of that is Quinn Roux. If you have Quinn Roux in there, you literally just let him walk up and down the line out, and as the line out comes, as the jumper comes down, it's either sacked or he stands there and just literally locks it out and tries to lock it out. Where I think Connacht did well at times against Leinster is they actually had the power to stop it, but they weren't pinning it at the sides. So they made maybe an initial stop and then it just rolled around. They had no. So what you need to do against it, if the maul does start going, is you need to apply the force at the sort of head to head against it to stop it. but then you've had to have sort of almost two guys on either side that are coming up slightly against it and pinning it back in so that it becomes stationary and you're not allowing it to roll around the side. And I think from a technical point of view, it looked like that. Look, I'm sure Andy Friend and the coaches are looking at these sort of things, but I think the quickest and easiest one is just to make a tactical decision on it, that you either compete in the air and you'll just concede ground as if you don't win it, or that you literally, we just sack everything, bring it down, make it into a ruck, and then we'll just try and work our defensive line from there. I'm not sure there's much more. One of the other things that I did notice compared to Munster when I was looking back at the Mauls, because I had a second look at the game myself over the weekend, and I noticed that the height and how Connacht were going back in to engage in the Maul. And I think one of the best Maul defenders that we have in Munster is Jack O'Donoghue, and his ability to get in between the seams between the players and get in through the middle and sort of latch onto a ball. And what he tends to do is he tends to get his shoulders below his hip height. So he's engaged in the maul, but then dips down almost into the knees and the legs of the players and literally pops up the other side of the seam so that he's back into the middle of it. And when I looked at it, I could see the sort of the backs of a lot of the sort of the Connacht players that were trying to almost lock the legs and sort of were almost like a straight line with the back and their legs the whole way through, trying to lock it out. Whereas I think if you can get someone who can go under and into the seam and try and get it, you might have a better chance of getting that. Now, again, you might be conceding sort of meters as you're doing that because you're not having everyone lock out. But I think there's alternatives around there that can be used. But it's certainly a huge point of weakness, and you'd have to hope that with the new coach and potentially a new second row coming in, that they can make the changes necessary to shore that up for next season.
Yeah, I haven't gone back and checked this, but I can only imagine the potential of different results if Connacht had a semi-decent Maul defense. Like the amount of games, Leicester being one, that Leinster game of the weekend, I'm not saying they would have bet Leinster anyway, but when you concede such a massive set piece of the game and a massive facet of the game, you're behind the 8 ball straight away. And I've never seen, like, as you say, that new coach coming in, a second row coming in. If they can just fix that, similar to what Paul O'Connell has done to the Irish team, they're turning a weakness into, an amazing attacking threat. It turned Ireland's kind of fortunes around, even something as small as that. So we're hoping for something similar with Connacht, because Gavin Turnbury was on press duty this week and he was asked a lot of questions, obviously, about the Maul because it was so much of a source for Leinster's points. But he has said he thinks the technique is there. He thinks sometimes it's just literally having the right attitude. He's like putting your head somewhere that you wouldn't put your foot, kind of thing. Like he's like that. Like a lot of lads just have to have that attitude in their head. But Andy Friend must be pulling his hair out here, Westy. Like, and Jimmy Duffy is by no means, and he's a very much respected coach. Andy Friend's a very much respected coach, but it's still an issue. And another thing we have to talk about as well, we've spoken about this on the podcast before, and Paul Boyle mentioned it, is the consistency of these performances. Like the Ulster performance was fantastic. They went up there away from home, pulled it out of the bag at the end, very resilient, a fantastic performance. And then it's followed up by this. And we've seen that too much this season, Westy. Like, Andy Friend must be coming to the end of his tether here a little bit.
Yeah, I think obviously even the interviews after the games, and I think he's a very honest and upfront person, and I think he's great to listen to, but he almost seems like, he's struggling to come up with answers at this stage. I think one of the things that happens, and I think it's kind of happens for the Hugo Keenan try initially, is we are clearly complacent. We get turned over way too easily. And then Keenan kind of walks through two players and scores. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to take away from anybody. It's fantastic counter-rucking by Leinster. It's fantastic run by Keenan. But I think we're 16 points up and we put our heads down. Then all of a sudden they're in. And then all of a sudden they're mauling over us for another try and they're in again. And I think one of the things Andy Friend talked to us about during the year was about getting players to believe in a system and stick to it. And I think we have this strange habit, and I've actually never seen it happen. We were so far ahead before. But it kind of happened actually against Leicester when we were almost coming back. Once we felt like we were back in it, we kind of seemed to switch off in certain areas. And then once we were 16 points up against Leicester, we kind of switched off in certain areas. And maybe it's a thing of, when they're mauling over our try line for the fourth time, we're kind of just switching off and like, we can't stop them anyway, And I'm not saying it's a conscious thing that people are giving up, but maybe it's a slight attitude adjustment that kind of falls off as the game goes on. Like, we were noticeably better in the second half, but I mean, the damage is done when you can concede 4 tries in 10 minutes. Like,
Yeah, agree. Owen, what do you think?
Like I looked at I was actually watching the game live. I watched the first 10 minutes, and then I had to give up possession of the remote control to my daughter to watch television for the night. So I said, look, that's fine.
Good call by you, Owen. Good call by you.
16-0 up. Connacht, the Cruise and Leinster are going to be how many defeats in how many weeks, and be a big inquiry about it. And then I look at Twitter about half an hour later, and it's like, okay, Leinster are in for the bonus point try, and it's like, okay, what the hell happened there? So I look back at the thing, and like the first 10 minutes, like Frank was being fussy at the breakdown, nothing new there. But like Leinster were giving away silly penalties. Connacht got their try through great pressure on the halfbacks, and they were playing well. They run good lines, they had good pressure on. I thought they were playing a lovely brand of rugby as well. They had lovely tip-on passes. They were varying the sort of the angles and the attack lines that they were running. And they got to 16-0 up. And then you looked at the kickoff, and there was a mess up on the receipt of the kickoff. They got caught with their ruck resourcing, and Frawley delays the pass coming in, and Keenan just has to dot it down. And then it goes a couple of minutes later, and Connacht have the advantage, a scrum advantage, and they get caught in a scuffle and get the penalty, and suddenly it's down for a maul and another try, and it's suddenly at 16-14, and they're back in the game. And at that point, the maul just takes over. The two things that I picked out for Leinster was, number one, their maul, and then secondly, their transition play, which, like, for Leinster, Leinster's defense relies on people reloading and getting back into the line, spreading out. They rarely go for the jackal. So if they're being dominant, it's only when they're really dominant in the collisions that they're going in and they're stealing ball and going for it. Otherwise, they prefer to get back into the line and go with double tackles and things like that, and making sure that the line is reset. They were going for the jackal, which showed that they had comfort in it. And as soon as that ball was won, it was literally just been shipped across the line or kicked in from Ross Byrne, and it was going to the wings before Connacht could reset. So, like, I think they were the two things. I mean, silly mistakes, giving them possession, then sort of ball would get turned over, and then you're looking at the case where, like, you concede that many tries that quickly. The game was gone. As Westy said, like, they came out in the second half and they ran their patterns. They brought Papali'i on, and he made a big difference, started getting them onto the front foot again. They ran some lovely patterns, lovely plays. Couldn't make big inroads. I think the Frawley going off for what is one of the worst tackle techniques I've ever seen in my life, brought O'Loughlin on, and he's a much more sort of defensive player for Leinster, and I think that sort of helped, because there was a couple of tries after half time, but it certainly wasn't anywhere near the sort of the first half onslaught. And I think that was due to Connacht coming back into it a bit more. For Connacht, like, I thought as I said, the second half they went through their patterns. Big Pappy came on and was just carrying almost by himself. I thought Heffernan looked good. Daly put in some big hits, and sort of Sammy Arnold, I thought, looked good on his return again. He looked sort of keen for action and willing to get stuck in. But I do think within that tight five, and particularly maybe in the second row, I think you've got that sort of mobile, agile lock in there. You do really need that sort of tight head lock that can just lock it down, help with the scrum, help with the sort of the maul defense, etc. Before you're going to sort of move on from that.
Yeah, there's a lot of negatives at the moment as a Connacht supporter, but there's still plenty of positives as well. Hopefully, the new coach coming in, a new second row. There's good days ahead. Just got to stick with it. But Big Papa is sort of they're sort of in a catch-22 situation, because if they start him, we don't know if he has the fitness for a full 80 minutes, and then you're taking away the massive impact he brings on then in the 60th minutes and onwards. As a team, the last thing you want to see coming on in 60 minutes is that absolute man mountain. So it's a tricky one they find themselves in with him, but there's no doubt in his form has picked up massively in the last few weeks, which is great to see. We'll move on then. Also, last week, the Lions squad was announced, and pandemonium sort of ensued, lads. I don't know. I can't really remember, but I can't remember a Lions squad being so controversial. Not controversial, but so much so talked about. Gatland has sort of gone ballsy with a few calls, and I think we all. I enjoyed that to say that the build-up, of course. Has any of these squad announcements ever ran to time? Like, they must have been at least 20 minutes overdue on everything. Alan Wynne-Jones was kind of vaporized into the studio, dressed in full kit. He's a full kit wanker, which is unfortunate for Alan. But I think we'll start with captain, obviously, Alan Wynne-Jones. Owen, to be expected. I think we all kind of expected that.
Yeah, I think that's potentially the only non-surprise out of the entire squad announcement that he would make it.
Yeah, I think we kind of said that last week, Westy, that Alan Wynne-Jones. No, it's Alan Wynne.
It's Alan Wynne. You're still doing it wrong.
I still cannot get this into my head if it's Alan or Alan Wynne. AWJ, easier to do it that way. Is captain, but we'll get into the big calls. Obviously, this podcast we got to start with Bundy Aki being named. I was watching it live. I could not believe it when he was called. Westy, I think you were the one who said it last week. I don't know if you said it tongue in cheek or were you being serious. Do you want to confirm that now?
It's 100% serious. I'd have Bundy in every squad. Always.
Yeah, true. Yeah, but when you really break it down, Squidge did a great video during the week. It's not that baffling, really. The biggest thing is obviously he didn't play much. He hasn't played much in the last while. When he has played, he got sent off against England for a tackle that was, deemed the right card. Probably was the right card. But I think Gatland and Westy, you confirm this, is looking as Bundy as is just so physical, and you're going up against the South Africans, and that's kind of what he needs.
Yeah, I mean, like there's a misinterpretation of Bundy as some sort of battering ram that carries up the park. I don't really think that's overly fair on him. I think Bundy is a very physical player. I think a lot of his prowess comes from his defensive ability. I think frequently in his caps for Ireland, he has one of the highest tackle counts. Frequently see him going after balls in rucks. Can't see him counter rucking. I think he does pick really good lines. And I think, not to harp on years ago, but, in 2018, he's playing opposite a different center every week, and somehow we're pulling off this fantastic gameplay. Of course, it's a shock because he hasn't even played too much for Connacht this year. But I think there are clear-cut reasons why he's valuable, and I also think, and I've said this a lot, we talked during the year about Bundy on the sideline cheering on Connacht and stuff, and even at other kind of excerpts you see from the Ireland squad. I think he's a really valuable player to have around a squad. I think he's a player that really relishes the opportunity in the environment. I think he does bring a lot in that sense. Is that something that's normally considered for the Lions? I don't really think so. But no, I think he's a fantastic player. I think he's lucky to get in, but I think, Gatland did want that type of player in, and the easy draws to make are like Ben Teo and Manu Tuolangi, who, they're contrasting levels of success in a Lions squad. But I think, Bundy maybe benefited from Tuolangi not being available.
Yeah, Owen, is that a good point? Like, I think us as fans get the Lions isn't the best players always the time. It's a team, a squad that Gatland is going to do a job with, and we kind of forget that as fans, don't we?
That's it. I mean, that's something I've been sort of preaching all along on Twitter when all the sort of the fuss of the squad announcement was going on. I mean, it's like, it's not fantasy rugby or fantasy football. It's not the 37 best players, available. It's the 37 best players that can play the tactics that Warren Gatland wants. And I think if you go back to that, I mean, historically what he's done is he wants Warren ball. I mean, if you want to go through it, is it's about using your big carriers to narrow the defensive line and create the space out wide. So what you're doing is you're trying to bash into the 10, create, or wherever you see the weakness within the defensive line, narrow that sort of the defense in to create the space wide, and then up the tempo quickly to exploit the space and go round them. There'll be lots of kicking. There'll be lots of big guys running into each other. I don't think it's going to be overly pretty. And I do think Westy is absolutely bang on in terms of Aki being there. No one expected him to be there, but I think Manu's not traveling makes it almost an obvious choice when you look back at it now, because Gatland is going to want guys who can offer that physicality in the midfield and can also pass the ball and play ball as well. So I think I can see, depending on what way Gatland goes, I think he'll probably go with two big centres. So I think it could well be himself and Henshaw could play in the tests at 12 and 13. Or he can go with something like maybe putting Owen Farrell at 12 and Henshaw at 13. But I mean, I still think, Bundy has a great chance of being included within that sort of and getting decent game time, and they'll have a good look at him and see within the early games, the touring games, whether he is up to the challenge of that. And I honestly think sort of the firm enough tracks out in South Africa. Look, I know it's winter over there, and anyone who's been to Cape Town will see it, but I think they're still going to be a lot better than most of the tracks you see here in Ireland, where you're sort of bogging around in the middle of winter. Harder ground is going to suit him. He's able to carry, and I think also Westy made a great point. He is that type of guy who will, I think, buy into the environment and the touring ethos of it. And this year more than ever, you're going to need that, because players are going to be sitting on top of each other. They're going to be in the bio bubbles. They're not going to have the same thing to go off on safari and go out and mix and within the cities or wherever they're staying. They're going to be confined. So it's almost the All Blacks thing of, no dickheads. You've got to have that, and you've got to try and get the right mix within the squad itself. And I think that could be very important.
Definitely. It was fantastic. I hope for his sake that he has a good tours, because if he slips up at all, people are going to be like vultures waiting around them. But Owen, there's been a few omissions. I think some of the big names that have been omitted, I think James Ryan obviously was kind of highly touted to go. Kyle Sinclair was a big shock for people who had a great game of the weekend for Bristol. Johnny Sexton, obviously, and Gary Ringrose were also omitted from an Irish point of view. Were you shocked at any of them in particular?
No, maybe Kyle Sinclair, I think, was the big one for me. I think I thought he'd get I thought it would be him, Porter, and probably and Furlong would have been the tight heads. I didn't necessarily see that there'd be much sort of change within that. I didn't think Xander Fagerson would go as the sort of the third tight head. I knew Porter would be there purely because he can cover both sides. It makes sense. But I think once you're getting into it, look, Johnny Sexton, I don't think he was ever going to go based on the durability, and Gatland has spoken about that since. James Ryan hasn't been there in terms of, I don't think his form has really been there since he had the concussion and came off early against Wales. And even before that, it wasn't great. Ringrose, I don't think was ever an option to go, despite what has been said within the Irish media. And that's not taking anything away from Gary Ringrose, who is a great player. He's just not a Gatland type player. And he's not going to fit into Gatland's tactics. And within that, I just don't see him going. I think I was initially shocked around sort of CJ versus and not being included and Conan going. But the more I think about that, the more I see it as being that it's not necessarily one versus the other. I think very much Conan is there along with Sam Simmons to be that sort of counteract the bomb squad that Razzie has, and sort of be there for when play breaks up after the 60 minutes. So in the last 20 minutes, you want someone mobile. Conan carries out wide. He's a much better wide carrier and strong player like that. And I think, CJ is very different. I think what Gatland is doing, and you can see it with the likes of Henderson and Byrne and Laws, he's going to put a lock at 6. And that meant that CJ wasn't there. It also meant that O'Mahony wasn't going to be there. And for all the furore that went on around, Sexton and Ryan not been picked, and these guys that, when it was picked off, from off the ball and some of their disgraceful comments that went on, and the Irish Indo and Luke Fitzgerald. I mean, you have someone who was a Lions captain 4 years ago, Peter O'Mahony, there's no talk about that. and he accepted it himself, and it was easy to move on. These things are, I think, they're fairly self-explanatory once you stand back and look at it and you take the emotion out of it. And I think, like, I was actually very offended by what was said from off the ball in terms of Aki. And, that, Gatland, he'll play him for one game and then he'll suddenly realize his mistake. And I think that was Nathan Murphy said that on off the ball. I thought that was a disgraceful comment. And for me, the best part of the squad announcement day was actually to see the reaction from the players. Now, I can only imagine what it meant for someone like Aki and for that to be announced when he's, with the Connacht squad. You saw the stuff from, I think it was Northampton Saints had it with Bigger and Laws, and there was some of the Gloucester ones. And I thought particularly Ken Owen's son, they showed him at school watching it in the classroom. There was some lovely stuff like that. For all the rubbish that we saw with the squad announcement, I'd love to see more stuff like that and talk about that and go through it and focus on the positives rather than the sort of the clickbait stuff that's been shown and ill-informed opinion, I think, maybe in some of the media circles.
Yeah, well, off the ball, it was a bad news story that Bundy Aki made it, but then immediately it was a good news story that Jack Conan made it, which was take that as you will, whatever. Off the ball, I don't know why they do that stuff, but they do. But yeah, I agree totally. The clips of lads finding out, I was shocked. I would assume they would know slightly beforehand. I can't believe that they find out the same as us, Westy. That just seems madness, isn't it? Yeah,
it does, doesn't it? But again, I think it adds to, as I always said, like, it adds to the kind of the beauty of the day. Like, everyone finds out at the same time. Okay, apparently there's some sort of email that goes around that says, like, oh, just keep an eye on it, you might be announced. So a couple of lads know they're in contention for it. But no, I think that's how you get those, and I agree on. I think they should make more of that. Like those reaction videos are like, oh, this, they really bring realism to it. And again, this year, I think that's even more important to show still how much it means to these players, because it's pretty easy to get bogged down from a fan perspective and be like, oh, there's no big tour, there's no big hullabaloo about it. But it's great to see it still means the world to all the players involved. And the fact that you can watch even one of those videos and somehow think it doesn't mean as much to anybody else named in the squad is pretty ridiculous. I don't understand how anybody, be it balls.ie or be it off the ball, would want to bring anybody down because they've been announced. And look, we're banging on about Bundy Aki being brought down, but like, obviously I'm biased. But it's the same with anybody else. You're saying, oh, Sexton should have gone. How come Dan Bigger is going? It's like, oh, well, Dan Bigger's had a really, really consistent Six Nations. Like, if you look at the ones and zeros already, it makes far more sense.
But Luke Fitz said, Westy, that he should have went. What are you not getting about this?
How many years did Luke Fitz play professional again? Did he retire in glory? I'm not sure if he did. No, I've never played, so I can't really talk. But
AIL, one cap, Westy. Don't ever forget it. Don't ever forget it. How excited? Yeah, how excited are we for Finn Russell playing on a Warren Gatland team? Like, the comedy alone could be worth the price of admission. Like, Owen, I said personally, I just didn't think Gatland would pick him just because of he surely just would scare the shit out of you as a coach of what he, we know how good he can be, but we also know the bad side of Finn Russell. Is he there purely because it's a different sort of option than Dan Bigger and Owen Farrell?
I think he has to be. I think it's the only explanation. He doesn't fit into that necessarily, that sort of Warren ball idea. And you'd have to wonder. So, I mean, I think Gatland, despite what Eamon Sweeney and the Irish Indo think, he's no idiot around this. He's been there. He's drawn in New Zealand. He's won in Australia. If he wins this one, he'd be, the first coach to be unbeaten across all three of them. So, like, he's no idiot across this. He's got someone like Finn Russell because Gatland knows that if he goes in and he uses Warren ball and he gets beaten out the door by a much bigger physical pack and physical team, he's got to have a plan B there. And I assume that's what Finn Russell is there for. And it may be still the case that Finn Russell can actually get in and get onto the bench and sort of be that thing in the last 10 minutes, in that last sort of 15, 20 minutes, if you need to change the game up or if you're chasing a game. He's the sort of guy, he's either going to win it for you or he's going to lose it. I don't think there's much middle ground in it. you know.
There's no boring game coming from Finn Russell. Like there's no oh geez, Finn Russell was quiet today. That's not going to be said during the games, but it'd be fascinating to see how he gets on. Westy, overall though, I have to say personally, we have to mention Sam Simmons, Westy. It's incredible to not feature at all in Six Nations and then be brought into a Lions team. Is this slightly a fuck you to Eddie Jones from Warren Gatland? I know they're not that friendly. Like, is it? I know he's a very good player, but is it in the back of his head a little bit like fuck you, Eddie Jones?
In a way, I'd love to see. Well, I'd hate to see it, but part of you would love to see like Sam Simmons play no minutes and like Gatland just to stare down the camera and be like, "Yeah, I did it."
Yeah,
but no, I think it can't entirely be. I mean, like it's impossible to shut out the media coverage of Sam Simmons and kind of the shock that he's not involved in the England squad. But I think it's as Owen said, he like Jack Conan is one of those better ball carrying number 8s. So he's not just maybe CJ, who's a really kind of impactful ball carrier and takes it to the line and takes 2 or 3 guys to put him down. With Sam Simmons, he's pretty nimble, he's pretty fast. So he runs in tries for Exeter. So I think that is probably something that Gatland's looking to do, that kind of variation of Gatland ball. And as you said, like Squidge had a video on it during the week where he talked about these players, and we see it a lot in players playing like a 2-3-3-2 kind of formation or something like that, where you end up with a wing and a loose forward out on the wing. So to have that kind of, if you end up with, let's say you're Louis Rees-Zammit on one wing and then you have Conan outside him or Sam Simmons outside him, if you have that option to distribute to a big and fast number 8 outside you to tear down the line, I think that's a really useful trick to have, because I think it does happen. And again, I see a lot happen for Connacht where we get to that second to last man and we have to cut back inside because the man on the outside isn't a trusted ball carrier. So I think if you have that in a Warren Gatland team, I think it kind of gives him even more free reign to play Warren ball as it's referred to.
Yeah, it's good points, Westy. Look, it's great to have the excitement now. I feel like it's, for ages I didn't feel like it was going to happen, the Lions tour, and now it's actually happening. That it's fantastic, and July can't come quick enough. We'll move on. Talk about maybe some Super Rugby. Obviously, Crusaders beat the Chiefs in the final, their 5th title in a row, I think, if I'm not mistaken, which is incredible. Super Rugby AU obviously finished up in a cracking final too. Owen, we chatted before, and you kind of brought to light some of the viewing figures, which was interesting to see. And I'm gonna read off some numbers here, so forgive me if it's quite hard to take in. But we saw a peak audience on Channel 9 of 464,000 people. The average audience on 9, it was up to 285,000, which was up from last year's final 232%, which is just monumental. We saw the Stan Sport AU viewers was over 100,000. And then combine all those numbers, it was the most watched Super Rugby match since the Reds rugby team won in 2011, their title win. Owen, we were trying to kind of break down what this means. Like, why do we think the viewing numbers are up so much?
Well, I think, like, to my understanding of the Australian model is that they've gone with I think it's 1 or 2. I think it's 1, possibly 2 free-to-air games every week that they're putting out. And then the rest of it is streamed on a service. I think it's Stan is the name of it in Australia, and it's sort of the equivalent of Now TV here. So they're streaming those and they're available. It's an add-on that you have with it, but putting it on free to air means more people are watching it. And I mean, like if you think they had it behind a paywall and they were getting about an average based on the numbers we were looking at, just over 100,000. And you're up near sort of 300,000 this year, So as we've talked about, and I've talked to you about it, Stephen, and I'm sure it's a lot of people's experience. Their first experience of sort of rugby, maybe watching a Six Nations game. How do you get interested in it? It's actually, it's actually seeing it there. And if you can't see this being played, if it's constantly behind a paywall, it's much harder to get that exposure and to get that sort of grassroots interest up. And I think, particularly in terms of the announcement this week from the Irish television deal, where they said RTE and TV3 were going to carry the Six Nations on free-to-air, and they were going to include the Women's Six Nations and the under-21s within that. So there's going to be much wider coverage. within that, and all on free to air. I think it's very important, particularly given that CBC came in and there was a huge sort of, I suppose, expectation that it was likely to go behind a paywall. It was going to go maybe the likes of Amazon or someone new even come in, never mind Sky or BT Sports, to come in and do that. And I think you see how important it is, because within Australia, you look at it, they're in huge financial problems. The Australian Rugby Union are effectively insolvent at the moment. They have such cash flow problems. They're looking to sell whatever they can to get the cash back in to keep things running, and to have free to air as well as the sort of the streaming service behind it is there. The IRFU are in a much better position thanks to their cash reserves and stuff like that. But getting it up on screen and getting the people seeing it, getting the youngsters there that want to pick up a ball, want to be the next, whether it's Johnny Sexton or James Ryan or, Bundy Aki or whoever it is, it's important. Johnny West, exactly. Not all of us can have his hair, So.
that is true. Westy,
myself.
It's a fantastic point as well, and showing these figures. But is it inevitable with the greed of these companies that it's just going to end up behind a paywall anyway?
But you'd hope they've learned from the last couple of years. I think it was Fox that carried the Super Rugby in Australia before now. I'm not bashing the company, it's just more the decision to go behind a paywall. It's also worth mentioning, like, it's not like here where we have, we've GA, soccer and rugby, we've got kind of three sports, or 3 or 4 sports that are on. In Australia, rugby union is probably the 6th or 7th most popular sport. So if you take a sport that's already pretty obscure and then go putting it behind a paywall, then you're going to lose out to the bigger boys. If you're NRL games, if they have a couple of free to air games every week, then that's just going to keep the audience where they already are. Same with the cricket, same with any sport really. If you're trying to break into a market, you're never going to do it by going for the elite option and putting everything behind a paywall. It's one of the things they say, like, rugby would be impacted in Ireland by a similar decision. If rugby went behind a paywall and it was only BT and Sky Sports that carried it, then you're not going to get young lads exposed to it. You're already playing catch up with more popular sports. You're not going to beat them by reducing the vehicles by which you can distribute your product. Yeah,
that's a very good point. Wes, that was a great point. Well said.
I was due one.
100 and whatever episodes in, we got there. And I don't know if you've anything to add on that. I think we'll wrap it up soon because we've passed the hour mark. But
no, I think Westy is bang on with that, and I think I think it's important that we have the national sides free to air, but I also think I'm also a big fan of the likes of TG Carr and their sort of coverage. I think they've done an awful lot in terms of the free to air stuff, and their coverage of sport, and particularly the rugby as well, has been fantastic to get that sort of I suppose the Pro 14 sort of Celtic League stuff in there. I was very critical previously of the RTE coverage of it. I thought it went particularly the analysis of it was very negative in a lot of what they've done. Now, I like to see the sort of the enhancements and the positivity that comes out of the likes of TG Carr and stuff at that level. But definitely the more, it doesn't all have to it doesn't all have to be free to air. I think there is still a market that can be there for behind a paywall, but as long as some of it is free to air and it still gets that exposure, I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, you're right. TG Carr is fantastic. Like, it's bad when a channel that I don't understand the language, I'd rather watch that than watching the English equivalent. Like, that's how bad it's gotten. But TG Carr are, fantastic, especially for chronic games. They tend to have a majority of them, so it's fantastic. But lads, look, we'll wrap it up there. We've spoken about a lot. Thanks again to Owen for coming on in Sam's place. Thanks to Westy for being here as always. We'll do it again, Owen. We'll get you on a couple more times because you're fantastic to listen to and very knowledgeable on the sport. So make sure to follow Owen. You probably, if you're listening to this, you already do, but it's at OverTheHillProp on Twitter and Owen Harrison on Instagram, I believe, isn't it, Owen? It's just your own name on Instagram.
Yeah, Owen Harrison on Instagram, yeah.
Perfect. Cheers, boys. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, lads.